We should today remind our American friends of their own motto: united we stand, divided we fall.
Good evening. Strong words from a different Donald Tusk, President of the European Council. He identifies the Trump administration and its cascades of executive orders as a challenge to European citizens and relationships. He sees the second threat as internal, Brexit, and the rise of anti-Europeanism in other member states. Tonight, as MPs debate Brexit, politicians both sides of the Atlantic wrestle with their consciences and their core beliefs against the hand their voters have dealt them. We're in Indiana tonight talking to Trump supporters. Do they like what they see so far?
I think a firm stance is kind of what we needed. We needed that voice saying this is what we're going to do.
We know that there's areas in the world that hate us. I mean, really, truly despise us.
Here, MPs have been locked in passionate arguments in the Commons over whether or not to give Theresa May the power to trigger Article 50 and start Brexit. But is it their duty to vote with their consciences, their constituencies or their country? We're in one place where the MP is defying his voters.
He's being racist against everybody, and I'm disappointed. I would hope for unity.
I like him, honestly, do I?
Where's the bill? The housing bill, that is. It's overdue. Why do governments find it such a nightmarish problem to tackle? And are malaria parasites developing new resistance to modern medicine? 4 patients in Britain have failed to respond to our most commonly used drug.
So the dangers of a rift between Europe and America are becoming starkly clear. In a letter to the EU leaders ahead of this week's summit in Malta, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, has listed the new Trump administration as one of the external threats to Europe, alongside China, Russia and radical Islam. And here, the Home Secretary has warned that America's travel ban could be exploited as a propaganda opportunity by Islamic State terrorists. All this on the day MPs began debating the Brexit process. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary.
You often hear from people who attend European summits that the man who chairs them, the European Council President Donald Tusk, is pretty emotional. Well, boy, is this an emotionally charged letter that he has written to the 27 countries that plan to stay inside the EU. As you said, he equates Donald Trump's presidency, Brexit, anarchy in the Middle East as equal external forces that are threatening the EU, and he warns that those who are thinking going down the path of Brexit, members of the EU who might follow Britain, should beware, because you don't get, as he puts it here, some sort of wonderful mythical full sovereignty. You actually end up dependent on superpowers. And I don't think you need a massive imagination to think which superpower he thinks Britain could be dependent on after Brexit. All this happens, as you said, on the day that the MPs start debating the bill that triggers Brexit. So some 7 months after that Brexit vote, 10 days into Donald Trump's presidency, critics of both are lashing those two issues together.
The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, in Estonia today, meeting leaders of the Baltic republics, made an outspoken attack on the enemies of the European Union. He lumped together Brexit, about to be negotiated by Theresa May, with Donald Trump, who Mrs May rushed to see 4 days ago, as existential threats to the European Union, alongside Russian aggression, terror and anarchy in the Middle East and Africa.
Worrying declarations by the new American administration all make our future highly unpredictable. We should today remind our American friends of their own motto: united we stand, divided we fall.
Now they're going to have an enemy in America and an enemy in the UK, because he's saying that Brexit is also a threat, and enemies within because of those people that are in Italy voting against the euro. Actually, what they should be doing is asking themselves, what's going wrong with this project?
Donald Tusk was speaking as the Commons began debating the bill that gives Theresa May authority to negotiate Brexit.
So at the core of this bill lies a very simple question. Do we trust the people or not?
Yeah. I wish the result had gone the other way. I campaigned passionately for that. But as Democrats, our party has to accept the result. And it follows Mr. Speaker, it follows that the Prime Minister should not be blocked from starting the Article 50 negotiations.
Portrayed as friendless in Europe, Theresa May is accused by critics of being in a rush to cosy up to President Trump and then being slow to criticise him. Scotland's former First Minister, who tried to woo Donald Trump for investments in the past, says he was approached by 2 senior cabinet ministers for advice before Theresa May went to Washington.
They were desperate looking for any advice on how to deal with him. But they've done exactly the opposite.
You said sup with a long spoon.
Take your time, sup with a long spoon. Do not go in a position of disadvantage. Wait till it's to his advantage as well as to yours to try and negotiate a relationship. Don't rush headlong.
In the days since Theresa May's visit, the government's been ratcheting up its criticism of President Trump's travel ban. Today, the Home Secretary said it could be a propaganda gift to jihadist groups.
I mean, ISIL and Daesh will use any opportunity they can to make difficulties, to create the environment that they want, to radicalise people, to bring them over to their side. So it is a propaganda opportunity for them, potentially.
The Home Secretary said she hadn't relayed that view to her counterpart in the Trump administration, but had told him about the demonstrations here against the ban. In the Commons, Ken Clarke, the only Tory expected to vote against the bill triggering Brexit, mocked the delusions of Leave supporters.
Apparently you follow the rabbit down the hole and you emerge in a wonderland where suddenly countries throughout the world are queuing up to give us trading advantages and access to their markets that previously we've never been able to achieve as part of the European Union. Nice men like President Trump, President Erdogan are just impatient to abandon their normal protectionism and give us access. Don't let me be too cynical. I hope that's right. I do want the best outcome for the United Kingdom from this process. No doubt somewhere there's a hatter holding a tea party with a dormouse in the teapot.
The 1.5 million strong petition against President Trump's state visit means there will now be a parliamentary debate next month on the issue. Last night, one of President Trump's potential hosts, Prince Charles, warned of a rise of 1930s-style demagogues.
The horrific lessons of the last war seem to be in increasing danger of being forgotten.
He didn't name names, but some in the audience felt they knew at least one person he had in mind.
Well, there was a mournful quality, wasn't there, to Keir Starmer's address there. Quite a lot of MPs are voting for something they don't in their hearts truly believe in. And although the government's majority is guaranteed here, because most Labour MPs will follow the three-line whip, one, incidentally, a leadership hopeful in the future, Clive Lewis, has said he probably will stand down, but most of them will follow that, and together with virtually all Tory MPs, the bill is guaranteed, but there will be quite a lot of passion, agony and heartache on the way.
Gary Gibbon at Westminster. So against this background, how do senior European politicians view the prospect of a state visit to Britain by President Trump? I've been speaking to the former Swedish Prime Minister, Carl Bildt, who's had many years' experience of the niceties of international diplomacy. I asked him what he thought of the invitation to the President.
That is, of course, for the UK to decide. I don't think there's an invitation to state visit to Sweden, because that's something that we plan very well ahead and is subject to very sort of elaborate foreign policy considerations, and there's a long waiting list. So that I can answer with certainty.
That implies that you think this was a little hasty.
Well, UK makes its decisions. I'm saying it wouldn't happen in Sweden.
Isn't the problem that Donald Trump is giving the American people what they voted for?
I'm not quite certain they voted for the details of this, but clearly he's playing on the fears and the emotions that have had him elected. That's true. I mean, he was quite explicit. He wanted a wall, he didn't want any Muslims in the country, and now he's delivering on that. That doesn't make it less disturbing.
How is the Liberal elite going to reach out to the people who voted for these things, and what does it tell us?
I fought all through my political career. I fought for open societies, open economies, open Europe and an open world. Always fought significant opposition to that. There have always been the illiberal tendencies in our societies. That's nothing new. And you can only win those particular battles by fighting the political battles, by arguing the case. And perhaps the liberal politicians, call them elites or call them whatever you want, of the West have been somewhat lazy.
Are you optimistic?
Well, I'm concerned. I've rarely been as concerned because I see sort of a Middle East that is imploding. A vision is Russia in the East. I see the disarray in the West. It's only the Arctic that looks okay at the moment, and that's melting as well.
Well, how long can you afford to be as pessimistic as that?
I am concerned, and I do think we will see political changes. We don't know where the UK is going to end up. I think we've seen stronger support for
You mean
the
you don't think Britain will end up leaving Europe?
No, I think you will leave the European Union. I mean, that's for certain. But leaving for what?
Oh, it's going to become a tax haven. It's going to be a low-tax economy.
If you're going to be very low taxes, you have low public expenditure, and what sort of society do you end up in then? I don't know, but that's going to be up to the UK. But the big question, to go back to that famous quip in the early 60s, Britain had lost an empire but not yet found a role. And then gradually Britain did find a European role, but wasn't entirely comfortable with it. Has now decided to go out of the European role. But what's going to be the role for the UK in the future? That's going to take...
51st state?
Well, yeah, well, yes.
Trump's 51st state.
Trump's 54th state, yeah, perhaps. I don't think that's going to happen. There's always been a UK thought that one can be Greece to Rome. But I'm not quite certain. Well, Rome doesn't always listen.
Carl Bildt. Well, to Washington now, where the Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly has said the restrictions on migrants from 7 countries is not a ban on Muslims and is and will remain in compliance with judicial orders. After the overnight sacking of the acting Attorney General Sally Yates for her opposition to the travel ban, the battle now for President Trump is to get his cabinet members approved by Congress. And that's not necessarily straightforward. Our correspondent Kylie Morris joins us live from Washington. Kylie.
Christian, it appears that more President Trump tries to roll out these shock and awe policies, the promises he made to his voters, the more chaos ensues. Of all his executive actions, remember, none of this is actually going through Congress. He's simply delivering these orders from the White House. The travel ban is the one, though, that has had a galvanizing effect, not only on the streets and in Congress, but as you might be able to tell from the actions of Sally Yates, who you mentioned, certainly among senior civil servants as well, who regard his actions as unlawful. Now, what's happening is that he is running headlong into the machinery of Washington, which seems determined to pester, to delay, and just get in the way as best they can of his sweeping orders and appointments, which is exactly what he predicted would happen and fits perfectly the narrative that he designed when he was campaigning to be president. Meanwhile, here, that is radio silence from the Republican caucus on this ban. There are a handful of exceptions, but the vast majority of those who oppose this kind of policy during the presidential campaign are staying silent. Is it because it plays to the base? Is it because they understand this is a president who, above anything else, values loyalty?
Well, this is not, I repeat, not a ban on Muslims.
4 days after it was signed, it took 5 officials, including the Homeland Security Secretary, to explain how the travel ban works. Secretary John Kelly towed the Trump line, despite a grilling over whether he actually knew what was in the order when the president signed it.
I did talk to representative in the White House, probably certainly early in the week, about where it was going, how it was being developed. Pretty busy week. I didn't get involved in correcting grammar or reformatting the thing.
Loyalty counts. President Trump will be pleased too with House Speaker Paul Ryan. No shades of the senior Republicans' former opposition to a Muslim ban. Today, just some issues with the way it was rolled out.
I think it's regrettable that there was some confusion on the rollout of this. No one wanted to see people with green cards or special immigrant visas like translators get caught up in all of this. We are going to make sure that we get this program up and running with the kind of vetting standards that we all want to see.
And complete shutdown of Muslims entering
Back when Donald Trump was just a candidate proposing a Muslim ban, Speaker Ryan said,
"What was proposed yesterday is not what this party stands for, and more importantly, it's not what this country stands for."
But back then, Paul Ryan also defended from President Trump's attacks the Khan family, whose soldier son was killed serving America. Today, Khizr Khan continues to speak out against the order the Speaker now supports.
When you alienate millions of Muslims within the United States, you have created an opportunity for those who wish us bad to come and recruit and cause harm.
Speaking out can cost you your job in Donald Trump's America. Overnight, the president sacked his acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, saying she betrayed him by telling government lawyers not to defend the ban. But maybe she was just doing her job. After all, at her confirmation hearing 2 years ago, a certain impassioned senator from Alabama questioned her over exactly this scenario, although at the time he had Barack Obama in mind.
But if the views the president wants to execute are unlawful, should the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General say no?
Senator, I believe that the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General has an obligation to follow the law and the Constitution and to give their independent legal advice to the president.
Fast forward to today, and that Senator Jeff Sessions is meeting resistance from Democrats delaying his appointment because they fear he won't have the independence to stand up to Donald Trump, whose first week, they say, has been an exercise in chaos.
I've been here with President Ford, President Carter, President Reagan. Never, ever seen anything like that.
More than 100 veterans from the national security and foreign policy establishment are urging agency heads to use their own authority to reverse President Trump's immigration order to prevent what they say is long-term damage to national security.
By banning travel by individuals cooperating against ISIL, we risk placing our military and diplomatic efforts at risk by sending a clear message to those citizens and all Muslims that the United States does not have their backs. Already, the international pushback has been immense and threatens to jeopardize critical counterterrorism cooperation.
If Barack Obama sought to galvanize Democrats with his statement of opposition to the ban sent while still on holidays, well, it worked.
Because what Trump has done is give ammunition to the jihadists all over the world who have told their people that we in the United States hate them.
Today in Congress, the spirit of rebellion continued, with Democrats boycotting hearings for President Trump's preferred health and treasury secretaries.
I think it's retaliation because they're mad about the election. But again, we should be not focused on that which is past, but focused on the American people.
As for the chaos around the travel ban, Republicans like Senator Cassidy advise sit tight, everything will be fine.
If you read the order, there's lots of, well, we can refine this, and they've already begun to refine it, as I think is appropriate. If someone has a green card or someone has a legal visa, they should be allowed to come in.
But shouldn't the final details be sorted out before it's rolled out so you don't have this confusion?
I suppose, but, you know, you and I aren't president.
Second-guessing President Trump, a major preoccupation for the party in power. So we've just been listening in on the White House press briefing where there's an effort going on, I think, to do over the messaging around the ban. In fact, beginning with that word itself, it's not a ban, apparently, despite the president himself calling it a ban in a tweet. That is no longer White House approved language. Also, Sean Spicer has been arguing about, you know, who knew what, when, and blaming the media for confusion over the ban. Sorry, extreme vetting measure. There is absolute impatience too, I think it's fair to say now, from the White House over delays to these cabinet level appointments. There is a gaping hole in the president's ability to govern at the moment, and the Democrats are absolutely making the most of that while they can, because after all, President Trump being President Trump, he's about to throw another issue onto the table, the appointment of a new Supreme Court justice. Now, this matters deeply to millions of Americans who voted for him in the hope that he would make the kind of appointments they wanted, someone who would protect religious freedoms or challenge the right to abortion. And they see the Supreme Court as the gatekeeper to America's laws. There's a great deal of drama around this, and the decision, President Trump's decision, his announcement, will be broadcast live in prime time tonight.
Kylie Morris. Well, now, it's not just the president causing controversy. Today, his top trade advisor accused Germany of using grossly undervalued euros to gain economic advantage over the United States. With more on that, I'm joined by our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy. Siobhan.
John, these are comments from Peter Navarro, who is an economist and head of Trump's new National Trade Council. He's taken a pretty sharp shot at Germany today, accusing it of exploiting both the US and Europe by using a weak euro to sell more of its own goods. Now, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, obviously denies that claim and says that Berlin has no control over the exchange rate, and that is true. But it is also true to say that Germany is the chief beneficiary of a weak euro. While its economy is relatively strong, the euro is dragged down by weaker economies in the zone, like Portugal and Greece, for example. Now, one trader I spoke to today said if you stripped out the effects of those weaker economies, the euro would trade at more like, rather than 108 against the dollar, it would trade more like 120, which makes a massive effect on trade. Why does that matter? We'll take a look at these numbers here. The US exports about $45 billion worth of goods to Germany, but it imports about 104.5 billion of German products, which means it has a pretty ugly trade deficit, you can see there, of about $60 billion with Germany, and that's the problem.
Well, does it affect us here?
Well, if this is the first spark of a trade war between the US and Germany, then it would hurt the Europe economy and the global economy. It also potentially makes things tricky for Prime Minister Theresa May. She has made it very clear that she wants Europe to remain strong, that she's a supporter of the single market. She wants it to remain a strong economy, one of our biggest trading partners. But at the same time, she's also going cap in hand to President Trump for a bilateral trade deal. Clearly, as we've seen today, they have very different views on Europe. And you would think then that might make their negotiations pretty tricky.
Siobhan Kennedy. Chris.
Thanks, John. Well, perhaps emboldened by the presence of Donald Trump in the White House, fighting between Russian-backed separatists and government forces in eastern Ukraine has intensified in the past few days. 8 Ukrainian troops have been killed and nearly 30 wounded in clashes around the industrial town of Avdiivka. The fighting has left thousands of civilians trapped without power and water in below-zero temperatures. The Russian Foreign Ministry has said eastern Ukraine is on the verge of a human catastrophe. So how is this upheaval being felt in communities across America, and particularly in those areas that helped vote Donald Trump into office? The state of Indiana gave the Republican a comfortable victory over his Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, has been to the small town of Valparaiso to see how voters view the president's immigration ban.
On the road to Indiana, the state where Vice President Mike Pence was governor, where Donald Trump got 57% of the vote. Valparaiso, Porter County, small-town America. The Midwest, traditional, suburban, picturesque, comfortable, and home to the Ulayat family, American citizens of Syrian origin. Isaf is recovering from surgery. She lives with her daughter and grandchildren. She had hoped that her other daughter, Sahar, would visit, but on Friday she was turned back at the airport because she has a Syrian passport.
This is not only about one person. Like you would see American from Irish descent, American from Italian, American from all sorts of different backgrounds. So you can't just stop this now. I mean, after all, it is called the United States of America. You don't want to be the divided States of America.
Darkness on the edge of town. A couple of miles down the road is Tommy's Bar, relaxed and quiet on a Monday night.
Oh, he is who he is. He is an anomaly.
Nicole and Christina like to hang out here after work. They support President Trump's immigration ban, but have some sympathy for Noor and her family.
I feel bad for them because I wouldn't want that to happen to me. But it's to protect her as well. She's an American now. She's here. So it's not just to protect us, it's to protect everyone.
I think Trump made a firm stance, and I think a firm stance is kind of what we needed. We needed that voice saying, this is what we're going to do. Obama was let everyone in, we're all one world.
Is it foreigners who make you feel unsafe? Because, I mean, I mean, most of the murders in this country are Americans with guns.
Yeah, you should go to South Chicago, right?
Yeah.
And talk where Obama was from, you know.
Watching 9/11, watching San Bernardino, watching Boston, you never know what's going to happen. We know that there's areas in the world that hate us. I mean, really, truly despise us and want us dead.
Do you think that this ban will make those areas hate you more or hate you less?
I don't really care if they hate us more, because they already do hate us. It's not going to make any difference. I mean, you can't hate someone more and you can't hate someone less. You either hate or you don't. It's not going to change anything. The only thing it's going to do is stop any terrorists from coming in from those countries. For right now, they have to look and see how they can fix that.
What do you think would be a sensible immigration policy?
Just like what my grandparents came here. My mom was an immigrant.
You're of immigrant
yeah,
stock, aren't you?
I am a first generation, and my grandfather had to have a sponsor saying that he had a job here in order for him to come here. So they had all the sponsorship. They came here, they had to have evaluations on health. Maybe it's not just health anymore, it's some background and mentally and all that.
There is a lot of vetting already, isn't there? I mean, for a refugee, for example, coming from Syria, it takes between 18 months or longer.
It possibly could, but they don't tell us this. I mean, I have no idea what the vetting process is. If they think that there's something wrong with it, then it should be evaluated. You wouldn't continue to drive an unsafe car. You would stop, you take it off the road, and then you would fix it, and then drive with it again. You have to sometimes stop things, take a good look at it. There's no way you can fix something if you're continuously letting people in, and maybe one of them is a terrorist. Maybe one of them will kill 100 innocent people. That's never worth it.
It's the talk in bars and homes across the country, where some fear Muslims and foreigners, while others fear President Trump's immigration ban will fan prejudice and bigotry. Ronald Reagan talked of mourning in America. Maybe it's nighttime now.
Lindsay Hilson reporting from Indiana. So what about here in Britain? As Parliament began debating the Brexit process today, some MPs found themselves torn between their conscience and their constituents. The Labour MP and one-time leadership challenger Owen Smith will be voting against the bill triggering Article 50, and he's made clear his opposition to the Trump travel ban. But what do the people in his Pontypridd constituency think? Do they back the president on this? And should an MP's principles trump people power? Andy Davis has been finding out.
Well, bless my soul, what's wrong with me? I'm itching like a man on a fuzzy tree. My friends say I'm acting...
Into the Prince's tea room in Pontypridd this morning, and first up on Trump, we bring you Elvis impersonator Keith Moore.
What a chill I got. Thank you very much.
Dare I say it, Donald Trump has been shaking things up, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has been shaking things up. I think he's getting a bit carried away. You give somebody too much power, somebody like him. He's a showman, you know. I really think he's going to do something silly.
He already has. According to Keith's wife, Jenny, this is her take on the president's hardline immigration stance, which has proved so controversial.
I think it's absolutely disgusting because he's being racist against everybody, and I'm disappointed. I would hope for unity where everyone would get on together.
You can't pick on a certain group of people and say they're not allowed into a country. It just doesn't make sense to me.
But to others here, it wasn't so incomprehensible. It just should have been planned better.
I like him. I like him, honest, I do. Why do you like him? He looks at a type of chap who's willing to have a go and don't get a damn, let's do it and let's put up with the consequences sort of thing.
But what about this executive order banning people from coming into the US from other countries like Iraq?
I think it should be all sorted out first before doing so. You should have done it more thoroughly before starting it.
And there were others in this area which voted 54% for Brexit, who shared the view, if Trump wants to take action on immigration, who are we to stop him? How would you feel if something similar was introduced here?
Well, I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't worry at all about it.
The only reason I think that he's put this into being is because of the terrorism, and it has been very rife, and that people have been blown up and all that. I think the best thing is to leave it go, see how it works, and if it doesn't work, then take it away.
And what about Brexit and their local MPs' attempts to block the process and force a second referendum? No shortage of views here on that too. What do you think of Owen Smith's position on this?
I think he's right. I think a lot of places, not just Pontypridd, would be worse off, and I think a lot of other MPs would actually agree with him.
Do you think Owen Smith is right now to defy the party on this?
No, I don't. As a nation, not just including Wales, as the UK, we voted to leave, and even as a Remain, out we gotta go.
He's saying that he's defying the party on this issue because ultimately triggering Article 50 and the Brexit process would make people worse off in places like Pontypridd.
I don't actually think that's his decision, is it? The people have decided, haven't they? The people have decided that whatever happens now, worse off or better off, they voted to come out, and you can't just you can't make the vote suit yourself.
I'm itching like a man on a fuzzy tree.
Trump, Brexit, politics. As Pontypridd's Presley puts it, all shook up.
Yeah.
So that's what Owen Smith's constituents think, but how do other Remain-supporting MPs square the majority for Brexit with their own consciences? From Westminster, we're joined by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron, who says his party will vote against the Brexit bill. And in the House of Commons is the Conservative MP and former government minister, Anna Soubry, who also voted Remain in the referendum, but will vote to trigger Article 50. Anna Soubry, you think it's totally wrong? This was an advisory referendum. You think the people have made a mistake. Why are you going to trigger Article 50?
Who said it was an advisory referendum?
Well, you all did.
No, we did not.
The law did.
Do forgive me. I've looked back on the speeches that were made at the time that this bill went through. And I know what I said, not only to my own constituents, but in the rest of the country as I was part of that Remain campaign. We made it very, very clear, in the words of the then Prime Minister, that you, the people, will decide this matter. And I made it clear, and I have obviously gone back and reminded myself of what I wrote to my constituents and what I said. And we made it very clear that this was a referendum where the people would have the decision, and I made it clear I would honour that decision even if I didn't agree with it, and that is what I have to do, and I do it with a heavy heart, but I've got to be true. Just because you don't like the decision, you can't then renege on the promise you made. And I think Tim Farron actually voted for the referendum.
Was it a rash promise to say you'd be bound by the result of a public vote?
No, I don't think that's your interpretation.
No, I'm asking you.
Was it a rash decision? No, I think I absolutely believed it was the right thing to do that we should have an EU referendum to settle this matter once and for all. And we hadn't had, I'm old enough to have voted in the first referendum. And I agreed that it hadn't been settled subsequently by new generations. I didn't have any doubt that we should have a referendum, and I wasn't scared into it by UKIP. It was my genuine belief that we should do it. And we are where we are, and we now have got to be true. And people like Tim voted for the referendum. He can't say no to it because he doesn't like the result. Goodness me.
Tim
that
Farron,
will make the disaffection.
Well, can you? You are saying no to it because you don't like the result.
Oh, hi. So, yes, well, first of all, I very much respect Anna's position, and she continues to be a very powerful and principled voice on these matters. I disagree with her conclusion, I have to say, on this, and that's not because I think that the referendum in June doesn't count. The fact that it's advisory is irrelevant to me. The people, very narrowly, spoke in favour of us leaving the European Union, and so the government does have a mandate to begin negotiating the terms of withdrawal. What they don't have a mandate for, and this is why I oppose the government's plans this week, they don't have a mandate to take us out of the single market, to take us down the route of a hard Brexit that was never on the ballot paper. And given that Theresa May is making those extreme choices over and above, assuming that the 52% all meant what Nigel Farage meant, for example, given that they're doing that, it seems to me that we know there's going to be a deal that will come back to the United Kingdom at the end of all this. We don't know what it's going to look like. Theresa May doesn't really know what it's going to look like. And somebody will sign it off. Either it will be government or those privileged enough to be in Parliament, or it should be the people. And the reason we will vote the way we will do this week is because we think the people should have the final say on the terms of a deal. None of us know what it looks like yet.
Right. Is there any other way for you to stop Theresa May taking us out of the single market, or is this it? Are you saying this is your last stand? effectively.
Well, no, I mean, I'm one of these people who believes that when you lose elections or referenda, you have good grace and accept defeat, but you don't give up. And the thought that somehow we're going to wave the white flag, as the Labour Party have chosen to do, on Britain's engagement with Europe and being at the centre of this family of nations that is so important to us, that's a nonsense. So we'll, of course, keep fighting for what we believe to be right. We'll fight for the best interests for Britain. But surely being inside the single market is fundamental to Britain's future. And we think it's wrong, it's weak, really, for the Prime Minister to have given up on Britain's membership of the single market without even negotiating for membership on her terms.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, Anna Soubry, I've been watching, has been nodding away through your answer just now. Can you persuade her to change her mind?
I doubt it. I mean, she's a very principled person, and I've got a load of time for her. I thought she was one of the most passionate and powerful voices during the referendum campaign. I wish people like her had been used more by the Conservatives during the campaign rather than the rather narrow Project Fear that was trotted out by Cameron and Osborne. But she will make her own choice, and I totally respect it. I do think that those of us who will vote against the government this week and next week are doing so not just because our consciences tell us that it's the right thing for us, the right thing for our constituents, and especially the right thing for the generations to come, but because in the end, this is about democracy. The will of the people was narrowly expressed back in June 2016, but the will of the people will be ignored at the end of this process when a deal is stitched up in the 21st century equivalent of smoke-filled rooms and then just imposed on the British people. The only way through that is to give the people the final say.
I think Tim's dancing on a pinhead here, actually, trying to find truthfully an excuse for him not to honour what he said he would honour when he walked into that lobby and he voted for this referendum. And he's looking for some excuse out of it. Look, I agree with him. I think it is unfortunate that we seem to have turned our back on the single market and the free movement of labour. And like him, I'm absolutely fuming with the leadership of the Labour Party that has just turned over in front of this and has shown no courage and no leadership and actually bucket loads of incompetence. They are absolutely hopeless, but we are where we are, and it is unfortunate. In fact, it's an outrage that we've not debated the single market, free movement, customs union, not even debated it, never mind had a vote on it here in this place as we should have done. But we are where we are, and it is the case that if the Prime Minister, as she's made very clear, she no longer supports the free movement of labour, then we are going to have to leave the single market, and that makes sense, and she had to give that clear message to our remaining European colleagues.
Anna Soubry and Tim Farron, thank you both.
Thank you.
Now, it's a simple message, but it could have big repercussions. The government's care minister, David Mowat, has told MPs that we all have as much of a responsibility to care for our elderly parents as we do for our children. His comments come as councils warn the social care system is in grave danger of falling apart altogether because of underfunding. Here's our social affairs editor, Jackie Long.
Raymond James visits his 86-year-old mum Edith as often as he can.
All right, Mum. How you doing? Fine, thank you. Good.
For years, as her health declined, he tried to look after her at home, with carers coming in. But 8 months ago, he says he finally had no choice but to find her a care home.
You want to know how I feel? Yeah. With my hands.
She's happy and well looked after, but it's a decision he still struggles with.
Just didn't trust the system, basically. And I just thought it'd be better if she's under one roof and there's people there permanently.
Do you feel sad about having...
Very sad. Sad leaving every time I see her. Yeah, I feel like I let her down.
He says the suggestion families should take more responsibility for elderly relatives is fine in principle, but won't work without a functioning care system to help them do it.
I think they're just putting the burden on somewhere else because they don't want to do it themselves, and yet they know they've got to. You can't just leave people on their own, just to turn the lights out on them and say bye-bye. You just can't do it.
This is a crisis which will affect most, if not all of us. Local councils say they already face a £2.6 billion shortfall in their budget for social care. And with an ageing population, it's a situation which can only get worse. Now, one government minister suggests the solution may be to expect much less from the state, but much more closer to home. Care Minister David Mowat, speaking to the local government select committee, told MPs it was perhaps time we changed the way we think about who should take care of the elderly.
Nobody ever questions the fact that parents, or that we look after our children. That's just obvious, and nobody ever says that's a caring responsibility, it's just what you do. I think some of that logic will have to impinge on the way that we start thinking about how we look after our parents.
What is the government expecting? Is it expecting people to give up work sometimes when they have their own family responsibilities to return home to look after a loved one? This is a shared responsibility. I absolutely accept the responsibility of all of us to care for loved ones and others in old age, but it has to be a partnership between government and families.
An extra £900 million has been put in to fund adult social care over the next 2 years, the Department of Health said today, adding government wants Britain to be the best country in the world to grow old in.
I think the carers are outside.
Raymond just wants the very best for his mum too, but deciding what that is never easy.
I would like to have her back at home now, even though she's being looked after. It's not right, because she would like just to see her, just to hear the noise of a normal family home.
Back now to the reverberations of President Trump's executive order barring migrants from 7 countries from entering the US. We're joined from New York by Betsy McCoy, former Lieutenant Governor of New York and a former Trump advisor. Of course, New York, a wonderful centre for migration and the reception of refugees right the way through history. So are you proud now of the slogan we must apply, which is "Do not bring your huddled masses"?
Well, that's not an accurate description of the executive order issued by newly elected President Trump. He's keeping a promise that he made to the people of the United States throughout his campaign, that he would temporarily suspend migration from the highest risk countries until the federal government could develop more effective methods of vetting those coming in. So he has temporarily suspended travel from 7 countries that were identified by the previous administration, the Obama administration, based on the most current intelligence. And that is what we are doing. He promised Americans he would keep them safe, and he is keeping his promise.
Are you disappointed then that he is not including the United Arab Emirates, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, responsible for providing 19 of their citizens who smashed up the Twin Towers and killed 3,000 of your fellow Americans and certainly have the chance of doing it again?
I'm not disappointed, and you're incorrect to say they have a chance of doing it again. The reason those countries were excluded from the list is that we have competent ways of vetting people coming in from those countries. The databases exist. But for the 7 countries on the list, they either lack the databases or their government, or lack of a real permanent government, provide no cooperation with United States immigration officials and Homeland Security officials in the vetting process. And that's why those 7 countries are on the list. Let me be clear to everyone watching that this is not a ban on Muslims. These 7 countries represent less than 20% of the Muslim population of the world. This is a temporary suspension of travel based solely on the lack of availability of data to vet those who are entering the country.
Betsy McCoy,
and I'd also like to point out, because we...
Well, Betsy McCoy,
I'd also like to point out, because we're addressing
you've not addressed the reality, which is, of course, that if the intelligence against Saudi Arabia was so good, we would know that they were exporting vast numbers of Wahhabi preachers and the rest who are spreading this radical belief all the way through Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. Why are you not moving against Wahhabism, which is a threat to the United States?
We are, but you are incorrect when you say that the databases don't exist. We have very good cooperation with those countries in identifying who's coming in. It's the 7 countries on the list that have failed to provide the kind of cooperation and databases that are required to vet people coming into the country. And let me just add this, since we're addressing a British audience. The Pew Foundation, an international research foundation, nonpartisan, has recently asked people in England what their thoughts are, and 52% of those polled say that they believe that travel from that part of the world does pose a risk to their safety in terms of terrorism.
Okay,
and 72% believe that the European Union is not doing enough to protect Europeans from the risk posed by terrorists coming from the Middle East.
You'll have heard
So I
today
think
that the
much
President of the
agrees
European
with
Union
me.
or European Council has stated that America is an external threat to Europe. But let me move you on to another issue, which is that of Steve Bannon, who was the editor of a right-wing website and who is being given precedence to go into the National Security Council and attend all meetings above and beyond that which is being accorded to the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff.
Well, I think you're nitpicking and distorting what is an internal decision by a White House staff about who attends what kinds of meetings. And I would urge your audience not to be misled by this kind of nuance.
Well, Betsy McCoy, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks a lot.
You're quite welcome.
Now, we were hoping to bring you a report tonight on the government's new plans to solve Britain's housing crisis. It's been promising a white paper to explain how it will tackle ever-rising prices and a lack of new homes. But unfortunately, once again, the white paper has failed to materialise. So why does Britain's housing crisis prove so hard for governments to tackle when everyone seems to agree we have a problem? Here's our business correspondent, Halia Ebrahimi.
It seems the housing market in Britain has been stuck in the mud forever. Some of the reasons why can be found right here at Barton Park on the outskirts of Oxford. 885 new homes will be built on this controversial site, with its own school, bypass and community centre, making the deep pockets of its developer indispensable.
It's taken 20 years for diggers to start moving here. And while there's been stasis for 2 decades here on the ground, house prices have skyrocketed 273%.
There is a huge housing crisis in this country. Well, Oxford is now officially the least affordable place to live in Britain, even worse than London when you relate house prices to income. The average house price is 16 years' salary. The community and the economy are slowly being strangled by the lack of affordable housing.
More than a decade ago, the former Bank of England economist Kate Barker said England alone needed up to 285,000 new homes to meet the growing population. The number of houses actually built has never met that ambition, missing it spectacularly after the financial crisis. And the cumulative gap over 10 years is now just shy of 1.2 million homes. Here's the Prime Minister. In her first day in office, she promised she'd make housing affordability a key priority.
You have your own home, but you worry about paying the mortgage. We will do everything we can to give you more control over your lives.
The government's white paper on housing was first expected before Christmas, but its appearance keeps slipping, with insiders now suggesting it won't be ready for weeks. Britain's housing crisis creates stresses throughout our economy. Even in fast-growing places like Oxford, private sector firms face a battle to attract staff with such a prohibitive price tag.
In the public sector, teachers and nurses can't afford to live in the communities they're meant to serve. The May government may talk a big game about productivity, but without solving the housing crisis, the British economy is going to falter, not forge ahead.
Some claim Number 10 has rebuffed rough drafts of the white paper, but the government has reiterated its commitment to the paper and to building more homes. Those in the industry say there'll still be a focus on starter homes, though not to the extent first envisaged. It is thought to include more flexibility for local authorities and social housing, a U-turn on the political philosophy that drove the Cameron years. There could also be incentives to help smaller house builders, support for an increase in prefab homes, and penalties for land hoarding.
If this government's serious about delivering housing, it needs to really drive that through into local authorities and encourage house builders. We need to play our part as well. Well, of course we need a fairer society. We need everybody to have a roof over their head, whether it's home you buy or a home you rent. It's a very serious issue. And affordability is becoming more and more stretched. We used to have, for example, 12,500 small companies, and they used to produce 60% of the construction output. Now it's down to 2,500. It's a massive decline. And you have to ask yourself why that's come about. And I think planning has been the biggest challenge to us over that 20-year period. We live in an NIMBY society. Those people that have got houses, great. Those that haven't.
That's not what Gina Gibbs thinks. She lives across the road from the Barton Park development and even 20 years on is still looking for legal reasons to stop construction.
It's just a case of not everybody can live here. There's other areas to live in that could be developed that aren't using up greenbelt land and important green space land that we're very short of here. We can't use up every single blade of grass.
Isn't this just basic NIMBYism?
No, it's not NIMBYism. It's been looking at things environmentally and economically and ecologically.
For the house builders like Crest Nicholson, the view is somewhat coloured by an economic irony. To build British homes, the UK needs foreign workers.
Well, I'm troubled. In the short term, we need to maintain Eastern European labour. It's at least 12% of the housing workforce. In fact, in London, it's as high as 70%. So if you want to deliver 200,000 plus homes a year, we need that.
The truths about what needs to be done in the housing market have been clear since Barker's 2004 report. The political will to implement them has been more elusive. We'll see when the white paper turns up how it rolls out this time.
Halia Ebrahimi with that report.
After the break, it's an illness that can threaten almost half the world's population. And now one of the leading drugs for the treatment of malaria has, for the first time, failed in 4 British cases. So just how worried should we be? Now, it's the most commonly used drug to treat malaria victims in Britain. But for the first time, the combination drug known as AL has failed to be effective in its treatment of 4 patients who'd all recently returned from Africa. The news has sparked fears that malaria parasites are developing a resistance to treatment, as our science editor Tom Clark reports.
Of the millions of people flying back to the UK every year, around 2,000 bring malaria home with them. Fortunately, for those bitten by a malaria-infected mosquito, there's a highly effective treatment, a drug called artemether-lumefantrine that kills the parasite. But for how long? Today, researchers in London announced the first cases of malaria resistant to the drug in 4 people returning from Africa.
We've treated thousands of people with this combination in recent years. It's been working very well, and there are no recorded cases of treatment failure in the literature. And here we had 4 turning up quite close together and notified to the reference lab here. So that did cause some alarm.
And these are the first ever cases of failure with this particular treatment?
They're the first recorded in the UK.
All 4 were subsequently cured using alternative drugs, but that's not an option everywhere.
This discovery has implications for how we treat malaria here in the UK, but what about in Africa, where these mosquitoes and the parasite they carry still account for nearly 200 million cases of malaria every year and hundreds of thousands of deaths?
Each UK patient picked up their resistant malaria in completely different parts of Africa, pointing to a potentially widespread problem of drug resistance across the continent.
How significant is this for Africa, where people are actually dying of malaria?
This drug is extremely important to our recent success in improving malaria control and reducing malaria deaths, and it would have very serious consequences in Africa. We can't tell from here if this is going to grow into a monster or if it's going to be a manageable event that simply requires vigilance and surveillance.
The researchers here now want to study whether the drug is becoming less effective in Africa. Recently, high levels of resistance to similar anti-malaria drugs has been growing in Southeast Asia.
Tonight's main news, the EU's top official says America is now one of the main external threats to European prosperity and security. Donald Tusk says that the Trump presidency has put into question the last 70 years of US foreign policy.
And that's it for tonight.
We shall be back tomorrow, 7 o'clock as usual. But for now, that's Channel 4 News. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.